Hello everyone, I am Rod and I am the game design instructor for the Academy of Entertainment Arts over at Dixie Hollins High School. If you are one of my students, it's Mr. Flowers to you, and welcome to this video tutorial. Good evening. In the last video we went ahead and made this grass, set it up inside of Unreal. It looks pretty convincing. Nah, not really. I'm going to jump back over into Maya. And we have this plane that we used. I'm going to just repurpose this thing. All I'm going to do is I'm going to select my plane and inside of my inputs over here, I'm going to change a few, whoops, not the projection, I want the polyplane. So width and height, I'm going to do this not quite as wide because I'm actually going to make a single blade of grass. So for my height, 24 is fine. For my width, I'm going to make this, how thick is a blade of grass? Maybe 3 centimeters, 4. That's probably even too much. I'll do 2 centimeters. And that'll be a blade of grass. But I'm going to do a little bit more to this. I'm going to make it so that it can flex and bend a little. So I want to adjust my subdivision's width and height just a tad. I'm going to grab my height and I'm going to add some. 3 subdivisions should be fine, or 4 subdivisions. That way I have one in the middle, one here, and one here, and then I have my top and my bottom. And then I'm going to do 1 crease down the middle. So with my width, I'm going to adjust this to 2, and that'll give me a split. And what this will allow me to do is actually bend the grass in the middle. Before I do any modifications to this, I want to set the UVs. So I'm going to come up to my UVs, UV editor, and you can see that this thing is kind of foobar. I'm going to select this, go up to UVs, come down to planar, my options box. And then what I want to do is make sure that I'm in the Z-axis. I can hit W on the keyboard to see where my widget is. Z is front, X is left and right, and Y is top. Make sure I have Z-axis selected here, and hit apply. And that'll go ahead and do that for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually paint my, my grass blade based on the size of this thing. So I'm going to jump over into, whoops. Oh, also make sure you save your work in here. I'm going to go into object mode. I'm going to save my work real quick. I'm going to jump over into Photoshop. Where are you at? So this is what we did last time. We painted a bunch of painted a bunch of grass blades onto our canvas here, and then we set up an alpha channel to kind of read this inside of Unreal. We're going to do something similar, except instead of painting all these different blades, we're going to paint one blade style, and then we're going to apply that, and we're going to repeat that inside of Unreal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click up here, I'm going to go to New Document. I'm going to do this as T_grass. I'm going to do blade, that way it's more specific, and this is going to be texture map. And I will, on this case, for my background, since I'm remembering, I'm going to set this to transparent. Make sure we're in 2048, 2048, 300, RGB color, and then 8-bit. If these settings are too high for your computer, you can always dial these down, but I find this reads pretty well for my computer. I'm going to hit OK. And there we go. Open up our layers, and I'm going to make my grass. Now you could load in a grass blade from the internet if you like. Just find something that's kind of fair use, free to use kind of deal. With my brushes selected, I have 2 greens already picked out. Go ahead and choose yours. And I'm going to dial this down to a size. That'll work. And it would be much nicer if I had my, my drawing tablet, but I don't have it right now, so I'm just going to paint this by the mouse. Since I know that my grass blade inside of Maya is going to be very thin, and I want my blade to use the maximum of UVs this is going to get a little confusing. If I look at my UV layout's kind of stretched pretty wide. But if I paint this thing on real thin, it's going to be paper thin on here, and I won't be able to see any detail for the grass. So in Photoshop, I'm going to actually paint this very wide, kind of like a leaf, and then when it gets applied here, it's going to squish it down some. So knowing that, I'm going to jump back into Photoshop, and I'm going to come to the top. I'm going to paint. I'm going to come all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to paint this way. I'm going to come all the way down to the bottom. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill this in. So I'm going to grab my paint bucket tool and just drop it in. If you get this little outline, you can adjust your tolerance to kind of get this. I'm going to just drop it one more time, and that should clear it for me. All right, so there's my grass, all nice and pretty. Now, if you want, you can use your mixed brush and kind of get different painting effects in here. Or you can go in and paint the stripes of your grass by hand. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use Photoshop's filter tools to help me create the ridges of my grass. So with my layer selected, make sure I have two different grass colors up here, shades of green. I'm going to hold Control, and then I'm going to click on the little image here. And then up here under Filter, I'm going to come down to Render and hit Fibers. And it's going to give me this little fibrous look here. You can change the vibrance and the strength to your liking. I kind of like the way this looks, so I'll just hit OK. And it gives me this. And that's going to work for the sake of this video. I'm going to hit Control D to deselect. And I'm also going to do for this one, I'm going to do a bump map and a normal map. So real quick, I'm going to just hold Alt. Let me go ahead and name this first. I'm going to name this my diffuse channel. I'll hold Alt, click and drag. Name this one bump. I'm going to turn my diffuse off. I'm going to set my bump to black and white. Image, adjustments, black and white. And now I'm going to raise the contrast on here so that I can see all the definition of this grass. So image, adjustments, I'm going to go to my levels. And I use my levels instead of the actual brightness contrast menu because I get more precise control here. So I'm going to drag my darks down to darken those out. I'll bring my whites up to kind of push them forward some. And you don't want to like bleach this out. You just want to have it to where you have a good sharp difference in contrast. And that's probably fine. I'm going to do something similar for a specular map. And actually, I'm just going to use my bump map to create my specularity. So that's fine. I'm going to hold Shift, or sorry, I'm going to hold Alt, click and drag, and I'm going to turn this one into my normal. Oops. Normal. Turn my bump off, select my normal. Inside of Photoshop Creative Cloud, under our filter gallery, we have a 3D node here that will generate a normal map for you. Since I'm using an older version, mine's under NVIDIA Tools. So I'm going to hit Normal Map Filter. If you're at home using a older version of Photoshop, you can find the NVIDIA Tools on the, you can just Google NVIDIA Normal Map Filter for Photoshop, and it'll take you to the website for the plugin. For mine, I'm going to have this checked for I can't really see because it's a tiny window. But I want these ridges to sort of embed, so I think I'm going to uncheck invert and let those sink in. And then I'll hit OK. And that will probably do just fine for my normal. I'm not going to be too precise, just to have some sort of action going on. And now I'm going to select my diffuse. I'm going to come over to my channels, and we're going to set up a normal map, or sorry, we're going to set up a alpha channel like we did in the previous video. come down to the bottom here. I'm going to select new channel. It's going to make this dark. Go back to my layers. I'm going to select my diffuse, hold Control. I'm going to click on my diffuse image here. It's going to select everything. Channels. I'm going to select my alpha. And I don't really need the RGB to be turned on, but if you want to work with the RGB turned on, you're welcome to click the eyeball there. Just make sure you're on the alpha layer as you paint this. And then you can fill this in. I'm going to use the bucket tool and just fill that in. And there we go. That's a basic normal map. Or, sorry, that's a basic alpha channel. Okay, I'll go ahead and turn the RGB back off, click on my layer, there we go. Control D to deselect. I'm going to go ahead and save this out. Remember to save the Photoshop documents in case you need to go back and use them for anything. And then I will save this individually as the different pieces. So this is going to be the Targa. I'm going to have this be my diffuse channel, so underscore D. Make sure we save it as a 32-bit because it does have an alpha channel. I'm going to turn the diffuse off. I'm going to bring this one up. This is going to be my bump map. Now it isn't important that you save the bump maps out as 32-bit because we only need one of these to read for the alpha channel. So to save on memory, you can actually click this down to 24 and it won't hurt anything. So I'm going to hit 24-bit. And for my normal map, same deal. Underscore N for normal. Go ahead and save that out. And 24-bit is fine because, again, we only need the diffuse channel to have our normal. Now, if you wanted to have these have a normal map on it, it's fine. It doesn't really hurt anything. It's just extra memory. I figure if you're not going to use it for anything, why bother? I'm going to jump back into Maya. I'm going to go up to rendering. I'm going to drop in a basic Lambert on this. And if your material attributes doesn't pop up and you don't want to dig, I'm just going to right click on my object, go to material attributes. I'm going to change Lambert 2 into my grass blade, and I will load in my grass blade image. So click on the little color file, go to your game design folder or wherever you hid your image at. I'm going to grab my diffuse channel, load that in. If you don't see it on here, just press 6 on the keyboard and it will render it, and you can see our little grass blade. It's so cute. And it actually doesn't look bad for being cheaply done. Okay. Remember, the more time you put on your objects and images and everything, the better they're going to look. But for the sake of time, we're going to make this quick. I'm going to go ahead and set my channel box back to normal, and here's my basic grass blade. So we have one blade so far, but I want to have a few blades kind of staggered. So I'm going to Control D. And what that's going to do is it's going to duplicate my object. So I'm going to grab this one and move it over. I'm going to hold X on the keyboard to kind of snap it to the grid. That's fine. And I'll do that for a couple of these. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to twist and bend each one of these a little bit differently. And for that, I'm going to use a tool that we haven't used yet, which is the Bend tool. Make sure we're in Modeling, and then come up to Deform. And we're going to go down to, Nonlinear, and then Bend. So if I have one of these objects selected and I choose Nonlinear Bend, it's going to give me a little handle that I can use to bend this. Now by default, this handle appears laying down in the same way that our plane did when it came in, so we're going to have to rotate this. Over in our channel box, you see where it says bend handle, and it's set rotate X in the 90. I'm going to go ahead and hit that to 0, and that's going to bend it or put it up, straight up and down. And then I'm going to come down to my bend input, and I have the option for envelop, curvature, low bound, high bound. What these do is this is going to affect the curvature of the piece of grass. So if I bend it, you can see this one's bending left and right. What low and high bound do is they affect the bottom and top bending point. So if I adjust this curvature out, and all I'm doing to adjust this, I'm just middle mouse clicking out in the scene here and just dragging. So if I take my high bound and I bring that down, the top of my grass will change. If I push it all the way up, that's as far as it'll go. My low bound, same thing. That'll control the bottom of the grass blade. Okay, I'm going to have the bottom of the blade flat. I'm going to set this to a 1. That's going to be the full bend. And my curvature is fine, but I want my blade to bend this way, away from the camera. So I'm going to go into my bend handle, and my rotation, I'm going to go into my Y rotation. I'm going to do 90 degrees. And that's just going to push it backward. And there we go. We have a blade bending back. So there's the first one. And I think I will adjust my low bound a little bit. Whoops. That's my high bound. Wrong one. I can adjust my low bound. Minus 0.5. Well, let's say I like this the way it is. What I have to do now is I have to remove any history that's on this. So I'm going to select this object. I'm going to go up to Edit. I'm going to go down to Delete. I'm going to do History. And that's going to turn this into an object that has been bent. I'm going to use my rotation tool. Since I've changed my bending point down here, I have to rotate this so it fits the canvas. I'm going to rotate it. And that should be fine. I'm going to push it down some so it's right on my grid. So there's a bent piece of grass. I'm going to do that again to my other blades here. So I'm going to have a couple pieces that are bent, a couple pieces that are straight, but that's fine. So I have one straight piece, and instead of bending this one, I'm just going to rotate it. And this one will be straight, that will be there. And now I'm going to do some weird things to it. I'm going to do a duplication. I'm going to pull this over here. I'm going to rotate this just kind of off center. Oops. And in this case, since I have my my rotation set to step, I'm going to take that off. I'm going to go to my tool settings here, and for my rotation, it's set to absolute. I'm going to turn that to off. That way I can adjust this more subtle. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to rotate it the other way. And just kind of bend it. And I don't want these guys to overlap, so I'm going to kind of pull it out. And as you can see, I'm just making a basic little pocket of little grass blade, bendy bush kind of deals. I don't want these to all be the same, so I'm going to move them around. Just kind of give it some natural randomness. Now I'm not going to go too extreme, but this will be good for a basic patch of grass. So I'm going to put my Step snaps back on because I usually use this thing. Absolute. Okay. Now I'm going to select all these, and I'm going to make these a single object by going up to Mesh and then Combine. So all these guys are their own little grass blade. Okay. Now we do that up here under our UV tab, UV editor. All these guys get their own UV section, but they're all occupying the same space. So what we're going to have to do is create a second UV set for our light channels to work. So what that means is we want to make sure that these are selected. So I'm going to go to UVs. I'm going to select all of them. Polygons. Go down to copy UVs to new UV set. I'm going to hit the options box here. I'm going to call this one light map. Hit apply. And now I'm going to select all of these, and then I'm going to go to my little layout button. So polygons, layout. What that'll do is it'll lay out all of my UVs on their own little subshell. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to have the color information. They do have two shells. So if I right click on here and I go down to UV sets, we have the basic one, which is our map 1, and then our light map for the other. So one has our color information, the other is going to be used for setting up our light map inside of Unreal. And it's important that you do this, otherwise our light will not bake properly inside the engine. And okay, so before we export this out, we also want to make sure that we have the correct UV set applied. So since we have our two UV sets, so this one again is our this is our light map set, and then this one is our color set. Just make sure before you export this that you go down to UV set to make sure that your map 1 is checked. Otherwise, when you export this, you don't want the light map to be the one that gets your color. So just make sure that this is the default, and then the light map will be your secondary. So make sure the map 1 is checked. Go ahead and close that down. Make sure you save your work. And now we're going to export this. So make sure your OBJ export is selected. If you don't know where that's at, Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager, and just make sure that the OBJ export.mel is loaded and auto-loaded. Hit close. And we will export this as our grass patch. So I'm going to do sm_grass patch. Since this is a foliage, you could say foliage here, but this is technically a static mesh, so I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to put this in my game design folder. Make sure that we set OBJ export down here. Again, you could do this as an FBX export. I just don't like the way the result ends up being for some of the textures. I'm going to export selection. And then I'm going to go into Unreal. So here's our old scene set up, and this is our old grass. I'm going to keep this here so you can see the difference. Make sure we have our static mesh folder set up under our content. I'm going to go ahead and open up my static mesh, and I will bring in a grass patch. And just drag in the OBJ. We don't need the MTL, that's just a texture file. Drag that in. It's going to ask us upon importation, do we need to rotate this? Yes, we do. We're going to rotate this 90 degrees since we're coming from Maya and our coordinates have been modified. We're going to make sure that this is set up correctly. And then hit import. We don't want to import all. We just want the object. Now when it comes in, it does bring in this texture, the grass texture blade. I'm going to delete that. My experience has shown me that whenever with the current engine as it is, when it imports the texture along with the object, it causes some breaking. So I don't like that result, so I'm going to delete that and I'll just import it myself later. I'm going to go over to my textures and I will manually import my textures. Are we? We called this grass blade, so T underscore grass blade. We want the bump map, the diffuse, and the normal map. I'm going to grab all three of those and bring those into Unreal. Once these are in, I'm going to go ahead and save it. Nothing worse than having it crash on you in the middle of everything, which it will do on occasion. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. I'm going to select my grass blade, the green one, my diffuse channel. I'm going to right click, go to create material. The default name is fine for now. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and then I will double click to open up the material editor. So first things first, I want to select my little node here. This is our shader. I'm going to come over to blend mode, change opaque to mask, and then I'm going to drag the alpha channel, that's this bottom one, to the opacity mask. A little box here so I can see it applied. There's our channel applied, which is nice. And now I can add my other pieces in. So I'm going to minimize this, and I will select my bump map and then the normal map, and I will drag those in. Go ahead and separate these off. For the bump map, I need a bump offset. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to type in bump offset. Basic one is fine. Go ahead and drag that in. Plug the offset into my UVs. I'm going to need that to go also into the UVs of my normal map. And then I'm going to want to plug in one of my color channels. This red one will do just fine, into my height. And now I will set the height information. Let's take a look. And you can see that it's trying to do a little bit of height application to it as it is. I'm going to set this to 0.035, and I will set my reference plane to 0. Actually, I'll set it to 1. So setting your reference plane to 1 will make it look like the image is sunk in to itself, basically, as opposed to it being popped out. And that should be okay. And I'm going to then plug my normal maps RGB channel into the normal. This is a little extreme. We could always put modifiers in here to dial this down. But for this tutorial, I think that'll be okay. Because we're not going to be up close and personal with this thing. We just want this to have some depth to it. I will also use this guy to control the value of my specular and my roughness. So I'm going to kind of pull this down. I'm going to select this. I'm going to just hit Control W. I'm going to use my bump map. I'm going to press M on the keyboard. That'll bring in a multiply. And this is going to be set up for the specular. I'm going to need a constant as well. So I'm going to go in here and type in constant. Just go ahead and drag that in. So my constant value will be in B. And that's going to go into A. For my roughness, I'll give it a value of, I'll say 3. And I'll plug that into the roughness. That'll rough this up a little bit. I'm going to copy these 3. You don't have to duplicate these, but just for separation, I'm going to go ahead and select all 3 by holding Control and selecting them, and then Control W to duplicate them off. And this is going to be my specular. Oops. This might be a little extreme. We don't need it to be that shiny. I can bring the specularity down to 0.5, and that will reduce the shininess of it. And it's a good thing as you're working to give yourself little comment boxes. So I'm going to select this group. I'm going to press the C key, and I'm just going to call this specular control, and then I'll select these ones. Hit the C key. I'll just tell this to be roughness. That way I know what they do. And then to clean up everything, I'll just move these out of the way. Okay. So that should be good enough. At certain angles, we can see the light's going to run, and that's going to be fine. I'm going to hit the checkbox, hit apply. I can close this down. Once again, we should always save our work, so I'm going to go ahead and save it. So now it's time to set up the actual object to be used for our foliage. So I'm going to go to Static Mesh. I'm going to grab my grass patch. And as you can see, this has a collision box on it. We don't want to collide with our grass. So I'm going to go up to Collision, remove Collision. And now I will set in the material that we set up. So go to my textures, grab my grass blade, add it there. Let's go ahead and maximize. Now these little artifacts that you see at the very top, this is a Photoshop glitch as mentioned in the previous video. It has to do with whenever you're creating the transparency or the opacity mask. For some reason the very top edge gets anti-aliasing applied and it kind of blends it, and it's really annoying. The way to get around this is to flip your image upside down. That way this appears at the bottom and not at the top. But I forgot about that. But it's okay. This is just an example. One other thing we want to do, actually two things we want to do. We want to make sure that both of our light channels are here, or our UV channels are here. So over onto our left we have UV channels. There are two of them selected. Right here we can check to see which UV channel we're in. So this is the primary one. This is where our color gets applied to. And if we click, we have our UV channel node here. So 0 is your first set, and then 1 will be your secondary set. So this is our light map. And just to make sure they're both there, they're both active. They are. I'm going to go back to 0. You also have other settings in here. You can make this a double-sided piece of geometry if you want to. You can adjust your light map resolution. 64 is going to be okay for now because we're not going to mess with it. But 64 is the resolution that the light will bake onto this. Higher usually gets better results, but we'll play around with that at another time. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck the little UV box. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And I'm going to jump in back into the game here. And like we did before, make sure you save it because Unreal has its issues. But like we did before, we're going to add this to our foliage. So I'm going to go up to the Foliage tab. And I'm going to drop this in as a new piece of foliage. I'm going to select it. I'm going to adjust this. I'll say 300. My radius I'll put at 2, and then I'll make this min-max scale. I'll do between 1 and 5. I'll get some really tall blades and some really short blades. And then I'll just go ahead and paint these. And let it render. Okay, so you can see these guys being kind of laid down here. Here's our little grass. I'm going to paint this on a little bit more, make it real thick. Now computationally this is more expensive because these are individual blades of grass rather than the little plane trick that we did. So it'll look better, but it's also going to run heavier because well, there's more things for the system to process. All right. We do want to also make sure that our material is double-sided. If I go to the back side of these, you see how they're invisible? So I'm going to jump back into my textures. I'm going to open up my material and grab my little shader node. And over here on the left, I'm going to make sure the two-sided is selected. I'll hit apply. That way our grass blades aren't invisible from one side. Now that it's done compiling, I'm going to jump into the game so we can see how this looks. Right-click, play from here. And our grass is a lot nicer than the other grass. Okay? Now you can go through and edit your colors, do some modifications to it, but all in all, it looks okay. There is a hazy white outline that can be polished inside of Photoshop. That's just the edge, the opacity mask, or the alpha channel. There's a very faint like white edge on there. You can go in and kind of paint that out. But that should do it for bringing in some basic grass, and I will see you next time.